Good. And I also just perhaps want to take a moment and introduce, we have 2 staff members from Feldenkrais Training Academy here, Donna Blank and Alice Friedman. That's delightful. And with that, I will hand it over to Jeff to talk about his case study. And I might, and we're going to leave 10 minutes at the end to talk a little bit about the Feldenkrais Training Academy. And Alice, do you have something to say, or is your hand just? Oh, yeah.
She's obviously sitting and waiting for the ferry somewhere.
Yeah. All right. All right.
All right. So we're going to deal with the case history of Arlene the Magnificent, or what did I don't even know how I titled this. Did I title it Arlene the Strong? Is that what Cheryl the Strong, Arlene the
Mighty.
The Mighty, yes. I want to take a few moments, because a lot of this work that I'm doing is about compassion. Yeah, and so it's not something that we talk so much about in the Feldenkrais method, because again, in our relatively in some of the definitions, it's not necessarily narrow or anything, but in some of the definitions of the Feldenkrais method, we define the work as helping people with their movement, and it doesn't necessarily, we don't necessarily see the work as a process for working with some of these really difficult, very traumatic experiences that people have had. And I would say that the first thing that we have to work with when we work with people is for them to become compassionate for themselves. And so I'm not going to go into the case history yet, but I would, just for in your own imagination and just in your own thinking, how would you think of and define compassion for yourself? And secondly, I would say, now, several of you are students to be in the Feldenkrais training program. Some of you are Feldenkrais training practitioners. But how might you think about helping a person with their compassion for themselves? I think it's an important question that we ask before I go into this process, because this lesson and the one with Cheryl the Strong, the issue was really had to do with the question of compassion. So just take a moment and first of all think of, how are you compassionate with yourself? What does it mean for you to be compassionate with yourself? And it's it was one of the, I can tell you, it was one of the harder pieces of work that I did with myself, which was to begin to really discover what it meant for me to be compassionate with myself. I'm not always, I mean, obviously, but in general, I have a sense of it. So to become compassionate means to accept that your life couldn't be any other than it's been. That's my definition. There's no way in the world that anything else could have happened. You simply, and how could you be different than you are? Yeah? And how can you begin to accept yourself as you are? That's the question of compassion. And this is not a question of forgiveness. There's something quite different in the process of forgiveness and being compassionate with yourself. And so I don't believe you can forgive yourself until you've become compassionate with yourself. Otherwise, I think forgiveness is somewhat of a sort of a mental construct, but it's not the actual process of looking deeply at yourself and being able to see that the past you had couldn't have been any different than it's been. And therefore, the very nature of that means that you couldn't be anything other than you've been. Now, we understand that this question of the Feldenkrais method is that the Feldenkrais method is about how we develop an environment in which people learn. Now, people have within them, implicit within themselves, and I'm really thankful to Laura because it was in the IOPS New York class that she really brought this home in the class. But that the entirety of learning is inherent within us. So it's a question of how do we awaken ourselves to our own native capacity to learn. And some of the other capacities that we have within us, if you look at the basic emotions, what are the basic emotions of Darwin? Someone named the 6 basic emotions. Some people have said that there's a 7th, but what are the 6 basic emotions? Each of the emotions is also implicit within us and as a species. And they're really, really deeply embedded within us. There's fear, there's pain, there's sadness, there's happiness, there's joy. What's the 6th? I never remember. Disgust. I think the 6th is disgust. Alice shakes her head right, yes. And so, and I think again it's important for us to understand that we don't acquire joy, we don't acquire anger. We can, we don't acquire fear. These are again inherent within us, and they're basically uncovered by the situation that we're in. They appear within the situations that we're in, and it's not so easy. I mean, in the sense that, you know, we don't think of, we work hard to acquire joy. We don't understand really what it is to uncover the joy that's inherent within us. And it's hard for us to understand that joy appears when we no longer are hard on ourselves. We no longer mistreat ourselves because we're not compassionate with ourselves. So this gives a little bit of a background to this work with Arlene. Now, these case studies, I'm doing these from the point of view of a Feldenkrais practitioner applying the Feldenkrais method to the work that I'm doing with people. Now, and please understand, and Anna, thank you very much for your letter, because Anna wrote me and she suggested some alternatives in the way that I was thinking about how I was working with the last person, the person with the difficulty riding in the passenger seat. And I want to make it clear that I'm purposefully not choosing to use some hypnotherapeutic techniques. Oftentimes, if you want to use a hypnotherapeutic technique, you'll take a person before you take them into trance. You'll help them discover a place within themselves where they find to be profoundly safe. And then you'll use that marching back into a level of quietness and into that sense of safety as a basis from which you might pursue your hypnotherapeutic suggestions. I have some background in that. I'm not suggesting that we necessarily compare similar states. Anna made a suggestion that perhaps if she found that she felt safe in an airplane seat, that maybe she could make a subtle transference of that sense of safety to sitting in a passenger seat. And so these kind of processes they're all very, very effective and very, very useful. But I wanted to have this process take advantage of the neurophysiological processes that we use relative to sensation and movement. So it wasn't necessarily about imagination. It was really about how can I have this person utilize their relationship to their own sensation, to their own movement, to their own ability to discriminate, to their own ability to find support. And as that internal sense of support changed, then they could look at the world in a different way. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that when people come to my office and they tell me some of these stories, it's very important for me to help understand, and I have to be able to catch this. They always tell me their story in the first person. In other words, they tell me the story as if they're still experiencing the experience. And it's like they're vividly engaged in the experience. They tell it, and if you ask them, are you experiencing this as you tell the story? Tell me some of how the experience. Are you experiencing this in living color? Yes, I'm in living color. Can you hear the sounds? Yes, I hear the sounds. It's not like they've put themselves in the third person as if it's something outside of themselves. It very much is something that they're recreating, and they're reliving it over and over and over and over again. And for the most part, they don't have a way out. They're so busy compensating and trying to protect themselves from any further injury. Yeah, and these injuries sometimes are horrifically injurious to them. So when Arlene came to me, she was sent to me by her psychotherapist, who knows of me by reputation and who's also been a client of mine. And her therapist specializes in working with mothers-to-be and with dealing with the questions of prenatal bonding and issues of bonding and postpartum separation and all the kind of issues that people have relative to their attachment relationship with their baby. But Arlene's experience wasn't very pleasant, and it was, in fact, horrifically difficult because she ended up having a caesarian, and the caesarian was botched. And I'm going to make relatively a long story short, but she ended up with her abdominal wall was not completely sewn. She ended up having a herniation. She was in horrific pain. Her bowel was protruding through, the rectum was protruding through the hole in her abdominal wall. She had swelling, she had intense pain, and her doctor and her husband did not believe that she was having such pain. Her doctor palpated, touched her, sent her home. And she eventually ended up in the emergency room, had to take herself to the emergency room, and had a necrotic bowel to the point of time that she needed serious surgery. And the surgery was aggressive and invasive and extraordinarily difficult. Now, when she came to me, and I don't know that I can do a very good job of showing you with this sitting in this particular position, but I'll try. But there was, if a person could be, I'll try to do this. I do it from here. If you could take a person and put her in a place where she was, I'm on a tilty stool, I can't even sit on it. That's funny. So she sat and she came to me, and her expression when she met me was like this. She was completely turned into herself. Now, she didn't know me from anything other than she came with a sense of hope and a sense of trust based on the relationship she had with her therapist, and her therapist must have been effective and absolutely was effective in having her come to me. But this was a woman who was really deeply hurt. She was hurt on many, many levels, and you can imagine all the levels that she was hurt on. She was hurt in the sense that she wasn't heard. She was hurt by the fact that she wasn't able to have her baby in the natural way that she wanted to have her baby with a vaginal birth. She was hurt by the fact that her doctor didn't hear her. She was hurt by the fact that she had to take herself to the emergency room. She was hurt by many, many different. I think you can take this story as far as you want to with this. So in listening to her, and I can tell you that when she was telling me her story, she was sobbing. Yeah, absolutely, completely sobbing. And the question, of course, is how do you begin to have a person, one, become compassionate with themselves, and two, change their curiosity about themselves? Yeah. Now, her feet were pulled up under her. If her toes even touched the ground, I don't know. Yeah. And so after a period of time in what seemed appropriate, and I have no idea how I knew what was appropriate other than just listening and being there with her, I asked her to find out. I said, "Are you willing to engage in a small experiment with me?" And she looked at me and said, "Okay, maybe." Yeah. I said, "Would you please notice the experience you have if you simply bring the sole of one of your feet to the ground? Will you find out within yourself what happens to your breath?" Now, this is very much in our work, which is to find out how we are affected by changes in support from the environment we're in. Yeah. I never touched her in the first session. I stayed an appropriate distance apart. I had nothing to do with asking her to do anything that would have been in any way perceived as invasive, because she had to have a profound sense that she was heard, she was listened to, and she was safe. Yeah. So there was no way that I could even cross the distance between us and put my hand to touch her in some kind of comforting way. There was no way that I felt that that would have been in any way a good idea. It would have been far too much. Someone else might have had a skill or been able to cross that distance, but it wasn't a distance that I felt that I could cross at that point in time. Now, as soon as she brought her foot to the ground, she immediately put her other foot on the ground. I didn't ask her to. She sensed from within herself that the moment that her foot was on the ground and that she placed her other foot on the ground, that it was a better place to be. Now, something as simple as that is as organic as that, because as soon as her feet touched the ground, I said, "So please now take a moment and notice very carefully the difference in what you're experiencing in the way that your breath is coming and going." And she stayed with this for quite a while. It transported her out of the catharsis, out of the emotional state, because she had the solidity within herself to actually sense something within herself. Some kind of sense of connection from the ground was giving her some kind of sense of being connected. So I then guided her for a few moments to notice if there was a difference when she sat with her feet turned inward, her feet turned outward, her feet a little closer, a little further. The classic kind of thing you would ask if a person was doing a sitting to standing lesson or something like that. And invited her out of the place where what she had done to maintain her sense of safety. And of course, now when we really truly grasp in this talk with Roger relative to the Feldenkrais and the brain and the conversations that were in that workshop with Roger, and when we talk about the nature of the limbic system's necessity to keep us safe, that its main function is to provide us with a sense of safety. And so if my attention is continually going through the limbic system, and I'm continuing to arouse within myself the emotional responses and the protective responses and the protective physiological muscular responses in the way that I'm maintaining my sense of safety, because I'm hurt. This woman is really profoundly hurt. She's physically hurt and she's emotionally hurt. Yeah. So the only way that I know that our work does is to arouse interest, to bring about just a moment of curiosity. Yeah. And in this place, the curiosity turned her attention to what was she sensing. Yeah. I'd asked her to move. She wasn't attentive at all to how she moved from one position to the next. It was a natural thing for her to take her own leg and to put her own leg on the floor. She put it on the floor. She found the ground. She's the one who found that in the moment that she had the support, that she felt better. Her breath was there for her. She had an internal sense of stability that wasn't there in the way that she was when she was in the story. And when we go back to Roger's statements and the thing that he was talking about, and it's well known that when the prefrontal cortex is awakened and curiosity is aroused, then in order for curiosity and for distinction and for discretion or to discriminate, the prefrontal cortex must have the other areas in the brain quiet. So it modulates the limbic system and it quiets the habitual thinking mind. So she moved immediately out of the place that she was in into a quality of composure. Now, all of us could do the same thing here. You could bring your feet to stand, and you could actually bring your feet to the floor, and you could find a different place for you to sit on your sit bones, and you could begin to find out whether that sense of a different quality of composure begins to be available to you or not. It certainly goes along with Moshe's idea that in order for us to really help people, then we have to bring them to the place where we bring them back to the purest tonic place possible. The point where the tonic system, the tonic muscular system, is doing a minimal amount of work to support us so that we have the greatest potential for action. My lesson with her, basically, I spent the time with her, the entire time with her, finding for herself that if she found this support, that she could be quieter with herself. And by the end of the session, she was profoundly quiet. I could ask her to breathe in one lung, the other lung, both lungs, asking her to discriminate. Which lung are you breathing in? When you have more weight on which foot, which lung is more available? I just kept asking her questions. Many, many questions. Yeah. And until she had a sense that there was a kind of the breath that we all know as Feldenkrais practitioners, all of a sudden, something that had been so deeply held, she just took this massive. Now, we ought to understand that in some systems of thinking, we would call that a release. Yeah. And when we look at this, we can utilize that kind of terminology and we can think about it. But in fact, what has really transpired is that she's in a different place. And that breath comes because she's in a different place. So the initiation of something different, the discovery of something different, the whole sense of something whole within herself provided her with a sense of I don't know, you just have to say that she was in a different place. She was in a different dimension with herself. I think I can leave the first session at that. The entire session was that. And the thing that I would say to you is that I had gained her trust. I had provided a solid enough, safe enough, I was empathetic enough. I was not asking her to perform. I wasn't asking her to do anything other than to simply observe something simple. And as a result of it, she left. And I could ask her if she was closer to the way she would like to experience herself relative to the time now. And I could talk to her about being compassionate with herself. I could begin to suggest that compassion means that there's nothing you can change about what happened to you. Yeah. Her anger, her frustration, the pain. Yeah. There's a question as to does it need further further therapy or catharsis or whatever she's been through? Does it need more? Or can she begin to actually come to terms with, what are you doing, Alice? I've just seen your fingers pointing at me. So can she begin to accept herself, care for herself now as she is? You know? So she's been told, and she told me the story, that she was told by her physical therapist that she would never ever be able to engage her core properly again. You know? And that she, in order to support herself, she needed to support herself, she needed to strengthen her core. You know? So you can speak up, Alice. You can jump in and just open up the mic. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm on the ferry and there's all kinds of background noise.
Uh-huh.
So I'm avoiding doing that.
Yeah.
So I just typed something in.
Yeah, I was wondering what you were doing.
But what you were just, yeah, that's what I was doing. What you were describing that might be release, I would think of as another sort of, maybe not one of the primary emotions, but relief.
Yes.
A rather underappreciated emotion.
Yes. Yeah.
That brings her into the present.
Yeah. That was the main thing about the entire session, was that she really began to come to the present. So, are there any questions or observations about this much of the talk? I would just want to just give you a Feldenkrais perspective on this particular kind of working with people who are so profoundly wounded, you know, and to how to maybe create the environment where they can really be with themselves. So, has anybody got a question or an idea or something that they'd like to ask or add to this? What their experience is, what's going on? I know Donna's always got something nice to say. So, if I unmute you, would you?
Thank you. Well, I would just say I think that's what you're talking about is particularly true for somebody who's had profound disturbance or trauma.
Right.
I think it's true for every human being.
Right.
Also, so this is. What you're talking about is something that could really be expanded to how do I work with anyone?
Right. Yeah.
As the bedrock for whatever comes next.
Right. Yeah, I'm just giving these examples as because I don't think that we really grasp that as Feldenkrais practitioners, people with these kinds of deep emotional wounds come to us, and that we have really, really good tools for working with them, that we don't, if we know how to utilize the tools that we have. Yeah. So, and of course, they're the same tools we use with everyone, because that is the method, but it's a question of gently creating the environment for that. Yeah. Anyone else have a curiosity? So I saw her for 4 sessions before it became inconvenient for her to come. And she hasn't come back, even though she's written me and said that she's planning to come back. But my job then was to have her come into a place of more and more dignity. But the first thing that I had to do was for her to experience profoundly that she could, in fact, engage her core in many, many ways. And that she could do things with her core that she had tried unsuccessfully to do in her physical therapy training sessions. And so I could ask her what were the core exercises that had been given to her by her physical therapist. And the core exercises oftentimes involve leg lifts, they involve hip lifts, they involve glute processes, they involve lifting the head, they involve lifting the head and shoulders, they involve all the things that we think of that would strengthen the trunk. And invariably, the difficulty that people have with working with the core is that they have some ability they can engage themselves to some degree, and they don't necessarily know how to go further. And almost invariably, the difficulty that they have in working with the core is that they find support in one way that's really, really easy, and they can't find the support elsewhere. And so if there's not support, then they find such a heavy weight to lift that they end up straining themselves. Now, if you've just had a serious surgeries on your lower abdomen, any kind of straining your lower abdomen is you're going to be protective. Yeah, she was certainly very protective. So some of the things that I did with her, I think what I'll do is maybe I'll put the camera on and just show some of the things so that we can look at some of the simple things that took place, because you have to dispel their belief in such a way that they can find profound success in a way that actually surprises them. Yeah. So that they can find a way that actually provides them with a sense of surprise. Now, the most basic thing that I did with her was, and it's classic Jeff Haller stuff, which has to do with lifting through the pelvis and lifting the legs and finding that their legs could have a sense of being weightless. Now, everything I did when she came the second time, and I asked if it would be okay if she was to lie on the table and then I could touch her. And it took a few moments for her to say, yeah, I think that would be okay. It wasn't something that was immediate. You know, I think that she began to trust me. And so I had to, again, to go about the process of engaging her attention in a way that she felt, again, safe. Obviously, I wasn't going to go anywhere near her wounds, and I wasn't going to go anywhere. It didn't make sense to me to immediately to lift her head or to move her shoulders or to begin walking patterns or some of the things that we might think about. And for me, of course, I believe that in order for a person to actually really experience themselves as being safe in the world, they have to be really, really fluent in the way they find their support from the foot on the floor. If that's not there, if they can't really trust the floor underneath them, it's going to be very difficult for them to trust anything else above. And so my first lessons with her were the lessons that I do, that you see me do. You can find them in dozens of places. There's talks that I've given about the fourth metatarsal and the relationship of the cuboid and the foot and the gliding of the talus, because of the innervation and the proprioception that the foot provides us, and the sense of how much a part of our positional sense it is. So I began to touch her feet and to make it so that her foot became really, really adaptable to my hand, which was the environment. And very slowly, as I began this movement of touching through her foot, and I began to work with her in such a way that when I could put her foot on the ground and I could ask her to begin to lift her pelvis a little bit, that she could find stability with her foot, and I could guide her. Now, what does it mean to find stability? And I don't want to be boring with you guys about stuff that I show over and over and over again. Yeah, because some of you have seen me so many times that, yeah, and some of you will see me more. But let me just put the camera on the table for a moment, and I'll sit on the table. I realize I have black slacks and black socks on. I don't know how well it'll be clear, but we'll see what we can do. Maybe I can do it against the rug. I just met with one of the departments at Bellevue College, and they're interested in possibly developing programs at the college for Feldenkrais practitioners. So kind of exciting. Let me just put the camera on. Now, you've seen me do these
Your
things.
camera went black. We were seeing it for a moment, and then
Thank you.
went black.
I can see that it went black. Let me just provide a little relief to the.
There.
Now you got to see the top of my head.
Yeah.
This woman, by the way, is a very tall woman. She's at least 6 feet tall. She's a little gangly. She looks like she could be a dancer, but she's more artistic than dance-ish. But when we look, of course, her first way of being with herself. Am I clear here, Laura? Maybe you can guide me a little bit. Am I far enough away that you can see my feet?
Go back a little bit further. There now. Yeah. Okay, that's good. If you could go a little on an angle, maybe like move. Yeah, that would be even better. Get more of your head in while keeping your feet in. There you go. Even.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we make these. When she makes these first movements, of course, what's a person who's had this kind of injury going to, and a woman who's been trained as a woman, she starts with her knees really profoundly together, her feet really rolled and collapsed in. And so the whole process of just being with her in such a way that she finds her feet. Now, when I work with her in such a way that I really take the time for her to have the sense that the force of her foot can come from the sole of her foot into her pelvis. So that when she starts to stand her foot, she can begin to at least have a sense that her foot is standing. And there's lots of tricks for doing that, but with this sense of standing, oftentimes I will just simply make a force from someone's knee through their thigh into their pelvis. And if you learn how to hold that just perfectly, the support will make it so that on that side, the diaphragm just profoundly opens. Now, if you take the support out, that sense of the breath, the openness of the breath begins to disappear. And that's a very important thing for a person who in this state, to begin to be able to associate as to when their breath is shallow and when their breath is wide open and available to them. So as I helped her, and of course, I had her do things like roll your pelvis to the left. And of course, in order to most people, as she did, she had her leg fall and her pelvis would roll, and she didn't have much of a sense of her skeleton. Everything just kind of rolled over, and of course, in this position, she's lying and she doesn't have any idea what she's doing. But if I begin to just in small ways say, is it possible for you to roll in such a way that your knee stays directed to the ceiling? Now, of course, with most people who don't have our training and our background, they don't realize that they have a potential to lift through from their femoral head up and into their pelvis. So they don't know what it's like to have the force come from the ground up and through them. And oftentimes you'll see, even in our profession, you'll see teachers who will give parts of lesson and they'll pull the person down with their knees together and their feet toward their feet. It gives a sense of lengthening through the spine, but it also gives the impression, in one sense, it gives an impression of moving toward your feet rather than having the movement coming away from your feet. So the question, of course, is, as practitioners, is what is it that we want to leave the person with? What sensation do we want to leave the person with? And if we want to leave the person with a sense that in a way that they're supporting themselves in a way that they're more elegant, then the force has to lift up and through them. Or they have to be able to lift themselves away from the ground so that their head floats. So all the things, and I'm not going to go through all these steps, but But as she learned to make the movement so that her knee could be still, so that she could find the femoral head, and I would take a skeletal leg and I would superimpose it over her so that she could actually see and sense for herself, until she could actually begin to make the movement, that she could just make this movement lightly with her pelvis without placing more pressure with her foot on the ground. And I could ask her to notice as she made this movement of lifting herself away from the ground, whether she noticed when she got taller and when she got smaller. And this is a classic Feldenkrais ploy. In Amherst, Moshe was very, very clever in the lessons, and he would have these lessons where he would ask us to go between smaller and taller. And to understand this whole process of making these movements as to when I get taller, smaller, taller, smaller, taller, smaller, it begins to give me a sense of when I fall in on myself and when I cave on myself, and when it is that I come to a quality within myself that opens and becomes, that I become taller or have a sense of becoming larger. And there's a way in which we can actually go between that moment in which as we fall, we can start to watch what happens with our face, what happens with our breath, that moment of getting smaller, and there's a point between smaller and taller. At some point of elastic point where you sit and you know that's smaller, and if you start to change it, and then you know that that's taller. And it doesn't have to be large, but you have to know the difference between the two. So that was what I did with her in the second lesson, was just to have her make this possibility of making this movement, lifting one leg, lifting the other leg, lifting herself from coming away from herself, having the sense that her sit bones would come away from the ground and up and through her like a piston. So I've activated, in other words, I've created the conditions where she activates all of her extensors and lifts away from the ground.
Jeff, just to let you know, about 10 minutes to go.
Oh, great. So how can that be so fast?
I agree. I don't know. And you have to switch cameras, of course.
I'm back. I haven't got stood up yet, but I'm back. All right. So through a series of lessons like that, 4 lessons, she walked out one day and she was a very tall and very beautiful woman. Yeah. Very, very, very pleasant with herself. All these movements that we did gave her the chance to challenge the belief that she couldn't engage her core. Yeah. I don't believe I've heard from her, because I think she's well enough that she can, at this point in time, she can be with herself. She wrote back a very enthusiastic and happy letter to me recently that her life has been really, really good. I know that she wants to have another child. So I think if she comes back to the place where she would be willing to engage the process of having a child, I think that would be a statement of her health. So, all right, that's a little bit about how I worked with her. Any questions? Becky, you look like you're looking for the mute button. Are you looking for the mute button? Hello, Becky, do you want to talk? I've unmuted you. You can talk.
Thank you. I was just writing a note. Could you share a little bit about what you did in the 2 subsequent lessons?
Well, the 2 subsequent lessons, I just took it further and further into her being able to I gave her the classic flexing lessons that we do, the lying and bringing the head and the knees together. The main thing that was missing for her, and it's missing for most people, which is what most physical therapists would call muscle imbalance, the muscle imbalance that she actually had was a neurological imbalance, in the sense that if I'm lying here on the floor, and if I'm going to do this way, I'm lying in such a way purposely my right foot is further away than my left. Usually with me, I'll do this purposely this way. So if I go to lift my right leg, and I'm asked to lift my right leg, because it's further away, when I lift it, it's heavier to me, as opposed to being in a state where my knee comes into me. This knee has the sense that it's actually going away from me when I'm lifting it. It puts considerable more strain on my lower abdomen to lift my right knee. And in fact, when I actually start to make the lift, the weight of my leg actually wants to lift my lower back from the ground. So that, in some sense, would be considered muscle imbalance. And the way that that's trained is to do core exercises, which doesn't necessarily change the internal pattern. Now, if I take this person and I help her find as the lift, and I help her really find the means by which her leg can come into her and her back finds the support, and so that she finds the support, I could hold on to her leg and I could ask her not to let me pull. In fact, I could get her to the point where she could actually have so much power in the way that she would roll her back into the table that she could pull me. And it's not by working in the hip joints, it's the way that her whole torso engages with the ground to make that possible for herself. When I did that with her, it made her giggle, because it went absolutely against what she thought she could do. Yeah. So I continue to use our Feldenkrais lessons with some resistance, with some challenge, but and ultimately, oh shoot. But ultimately, towards the end of her really finding, when she stood, she could stand with the, in a way, you know, how do you stand when you're in your absolute most divine sense of being present in the moment? If you were to stand and you say, for example, you had a diamond heart or a jewel for a heart, and you were going to have, and somehow you would turn yourself on internally in such a way that that light would shine out of you. How would you stand if that light could be exposed? And what would you do to hood the light, or to cover the light, or to shade the light within yourself? What would be the expression? How would you make that darkness, or that veiling process? Where are you in that process of opening, closing, larger, smaller, taller, shorter? Where's that point within yourself where you're not hiding and you're quite comfortable with your ability to just simply be yourself in the world? That I believe is the place that she was in the last time I saw her. I don't know if she'll maintain it, but that's a hell of a movement in a few short sessions. Yeah. All right, Laura, what should we do? We have a minute or two. Do you want to ask me questions about the Academy, or do you want to make a statement?
Yeah, I'll make a statement. Maybe that will cause other people to ask questions. So one of the things that I'm very excited about is taking this ideas and teaching it from the beginning in a Feldenkrais Training Academy. So that's Jeff's intention. And one of the reasons for having these talks is so that one can really understand the philosophy that's going to be part of the Feldenkrais Training Academy. And again, Donna Blank will be part of that, and Alice, who is also a staff member on this call. So I'd also like to invite people to ask questions about the upcoming training, as well as just about Arlene the Mighty.
Yeah. I mean, most of you, Nikki and Jeff, when am I getting your application? Come on, man, what's going on here? Are you still confused about this? Okay. Meet Nikki. She's going to be a classmate. All right. That is the intention for the academy, is to develop practitioners, the modality, to really examine the advantages of the modality of the Feldenkrais method. Not only to be profoundly sound in the principles of the work, the biomechanic and physiological principles of the work, but to see what advantage we have for working with people in all walks of life and not to limit ourselves. I have to say that part of my desire to do this in this way was because for so many years, I was disappointed with the outcomes of some of my trainings in the past. And I can understand it, that many people left the training programs and then pursued other avenues of study. It's not, and again, nothing wrong with pursuing other avenues of study. I studied many things in my own life. I studied meditation, and I studied a lot of Aikido, a lot of other trainings, outside trainings, and they were important to my understanding of Moshe's work. But I didn't do a very good job of really bringing to light the Feldenkrais method as a practice that could meet the demands of people in multiple ways, in multiple areas. And so I'm really dedicated to this work as a way of fostering transformation and health with the people that we work with, and for us to redefine what it means to be a Feldenkrais practitioner in the community, and what is our advantages and what is it that we have to offer as practitioners. I don't think that there's anyone. Okay, Becky. Put your hand on the TV, Becky. Now, all I want is one small jet. Have you seen the news? With he's already got three Lear jets, but he's wanting one more from his community. So anyway, so we have we can aid the processes that people are going through. The thing, especially when we get to Cheryl the Strong, another woman who had so many issues with so many years of therapy, but not having the sense of embodiment that came out of it. And I think that the thing that happened with Arlene was that as she became more and more connected to her own sense of embodiment, she could really put the past aside, because her own sense of being connected it became more important and more real to her than jumping into the mind and all the pain that her memory caused her. You have to have something very profound that's worthwhile if you're going to give up the way that you've historically maintained your sense of safety. Something has to be safer and have a higher value, a higher valence than what you were doing in the past. It has to be concrete, and it has to work. Yeah. So that's what I would say. Donna, you have something to add? Anna, anybody? Nikki, Ellen, something? Just a moment to say something with this. Hi, Ellen's daughter. I haven't seen you since you were very young. She's shy like you, Ellen. Go ahead, Donna.
Can you?
Yeah, I got you. Yep, okay. I did.
So this may be completely apparent to most of you, but I think what Jeff is talking about is something lots of us who've worked a long time come to have to know if we want to develop a varied practice and really work with what we're talking about as the whole person. And a lot of trainings really don't address the level that Jeff is tonight. You know, in terms of, it can be implicit because it's implicit in the principles of Moshe's work, but what gets emphasized and how it gets um, where the focus is. It's often not on what Jeff has been talking about tonight. And I think, and making that clear and explicit in a way that each one of us can bring that into life in ourselves and with other people in a concrete, useful way is, I think, a real advantage of what's going on here. And I consider it an evolution of the work. It's just, Moshe had a lot of great principles. He put a lot out there. We were all kind of crazy back then. And there was a lot to decipher. And Jeff has been spending his life doing that with Moshe's principles. And so bringing these aspects forward, I think, is really critical to working more with the whole person in an effective way. Has to do with really listening to what that person needs and how to begin with them and where to take that in relationship to that person. Rather, it's interesting to me that you can teach the same lesson, Jeff. I mean, how many times do we work with the foot and the hip and the taller and the smaller? It's like it's very bedrock.
Right.
And yet how that was titrated to her situation, listening for what that is I think another level of work that this training really wants to address. And that has everything to do with whether your practice grows.
Right. And again, just for you guys that are listening to this, Donna she was in the same training in Amherst that I was, and her work is in deep listening. She'll be at the training, and her segment will be for deep listening. It will be deep listening to yourself, and so that from that deep listening for yourself, it becomes a part of the very nature of the way that your hand listens to the person you're working with.
Could I add one little piece to that?
Yes, please. No, you can't.
We're short on time here, but yeah. It's also, how do I listen to myself as I'm listening to you?
Right. Exactly.
What is there in me? And we talk about that skeletally a lot,
right,
in every training. But there's a lot more there that's going on in each of us as we're with another person.
Right.
To be able to develop that sense of listening to that with letting it come into awareness,
right,
accepting it, as you were using that word, Jeff, earlier, right? Accepting it without necessarily activating it at the same time is a deep skill that takes a long time and requires the compassion with oneself as you're working with another person.
The compassion is so important, because otherwise, the moment the anxiety hits, when I'm in a lesson and I've had the first thought is, I don't know what I'm doing. And then I start scrambling for what are the few things that I know to do. And then at the end of the lesson, I beat myself because I couldn't have done something more creative. And I just applied what I know. And before long, it's not very long before I have a profound sense that I'm not very good at this work. And somehow I have to be able to profoundly, really deeply address being with the emotions and the anxiety and the affect and what my mind is producing in such a way that I can listen through all that and actually listen to what am I actually experiencing. And that has to be part of our practice, and it has to be part of our training program. All right, I believe our time is up. If there's not another question, Laura, do you know when we meet again?
Yes, in 2 weeks, we will be doing the case study with Go RJ, Tuesday, June 19th from 5 to 6.
Just to give you a hint, RJ was in the Brazil Olympics. So he's and came with and as you can imagine, someone who's trained to that level might have had a few injuries. All right. Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you again, Alice. And by the way, Alice brings her background as a psychologist to the training with the same kind of sensitivity. So we'll be well imbued in this listening process. So, all right. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Laura,